Sorry, I just heard something over my head. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get hit started, and then when Juan and the vice chair and Barbara, the chair, come in, we'll have the gavel rolled over. So just want to make sure I know I have John Dome, George Corzo, and Stanley Regard on camera, and then I see that's 3 members, and then there is Willie. Villarada still is not. There is Willie.
Yes.
Villarada. All right. So Willie, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, and we can hear you. Bill, can you hear me? Bill? Villarada. Bill Arada, can you hear me? You're not muted. So hello, Bill Arada. Okay. Ivan, can you just check on William Arada's connection? See if because that way we can go ahead and get the meeting started. We have we need at least three people for quorum. We have that, so I'm going to go ahead and call to have just do some switching around here. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. The time right now is 2:10 p.m. for the May 13th FTAC meeting. Seeing as there is not the chair and vice chair are currently not here, out of the 5 members we have present, hopefully William can hear me. John Dome, George Corzo, Stanley, Willie, and William. The 5 of you need to, as we've done in the past, vote on who will be the chair for the meeting until the vice chair and chair arrive. So
I motion for John.
Okay, who was that? Was that Willie? Who said motion for John? Oh, well, Stanley. Okay. All right. So John.
I second that.
All right. So Stanley and George. So John, you are the acting chair.
Okay. Well, 1 second, and I'll get the agenda up in front of me. Thank you.
All right. So
bear with me one moment.
No problem. We're gonna get to that in a second. So before, I just wanted to make sure that we had that so we can all start talking. So welcome to, as I mentioned before, welcome to the May 13th meeting of the Freight Transportation Advisory Committee. Can we go to the next slide, please, Ivan? These are the rules of engagement. I'm not going to read everything off the screen because you can see it, but just make a couple of points. This is a public meeting and it's going to be recorded. If you have any technical difficulties, the contact person, Ivan's name and email is up there. Everybody's going to be held on mute, so there's no interference and so forth through the meeting. When there's the question and answer session after the 2 presentations, then everybody will be left off mute so you can talk and raise your questions at that time. And then if there is any required vote, for any resolution or anything like that, we have to, I'll call your name and have to actually hear you or see you say yay or nay on the roll call. And now, speaking of the roll call, I'm going to go ahead and take the attendance now. So I know I've mentioned your names before, but when I call your name, you have to respond saying if you're here. All right. So we have acting chair John Dome.
Present.
Okay. George Corzo.
Present.
Okay. Willie Moore. Willie Moore.
Present. Sorry, I was muted.
Okay. Stanley Rigaud,
Present.
Bill Arata. I see his name there, but he,
I'm sorry.
was that you, Bill?
Bill is
Bill?
9. That sound effect you hear there, that's his microphone. I'm trying to resolve technical difficulty.
All right. All right. So, and we still, as of now, do not have Juan Flores or Barbara Pimentel are not here yet. So we have 5 members, 4 of which we can hear, and they can hear us. All right. So go to the next slide, please, Ivan. Ivan, you can go to the next slide, please. Yes, he's all right. So John.
Yes, I've got an agenda separate here.
Yeah. So right now we're going to go with item number 2, which is approval of the agenda. So
okay.
You're going to do numbers 2, 3, and 4.
Okay. Well, we'll start out. Can we get a motion to approve the agenda?
Aye.
Will any member of the Stanley's moved to approve? Will we get a second?
I second.
Okay.
Thank you. George has moved to second. Is there any discussion on it? In favor? All in favor?
Actually was Willie the one that seconded the agenda.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I have
Thank you.
down. Mm-hmm.
My microphone was mute. Going back.
Oh, okay. I thought I saw you speak. Well, it sounds like there's no discussion. All in favor? Everybody's affirmative. The agenda's approved.
Yep.
Then can we entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting on April the 8th?
I move to approve.
Stanley's moved to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay,
Thank you,
George.
Is there any discussion about the minutes? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we've approved the minutes. Now we'd like to open the floor for public comments. And we have quite a few attendees, which we can see on the site. Can you unmute the attendees so that or how do you prefer to do this? To raise a hand?
Yeah, so right now everybody's unmuted. So therefore, if you have any public comments, and this would be the time for them to make any points at this time.
Would anyone like to speak forward? Well, hearing none, I guess we will proceed then with the agenda items. We start with the Golden Glades Truck Travel Center. That would be you, Carlos.
Excellent. All right. So I guess there's a bit of a lag with the presentation, but anyways, thank you.
Oh, there we go.
Here we go. All right. Excellent. So again, my name is Carlos Castro. I'm the District Freight Coordinator for District 6 here, and I'm going to be presenting this item, the Golden Glades Truck Travel Center. Essentially, it's really an old item, and I wanted to come back to the committee and give you an update on what's transpired, what's going on, and as Kevin mentioned, I'm going to be able to field some questions once I complete the presentation. Next slide, please. The agenda items. So I'm not going to spend too much talking about the scope, the schedule, the documented need of the project itself, some of the history. I'll show you a couple of slides on some of the previous PD&E concepts. I'll talk a little bit about legal considerations in terms of the RFP and some of the federal requirements, as well as the technology requirements that the department is looking for in a project like this. But mainly, I wanted to talk about financing and some of the risks associated with the project. I know this committee, if you've been around long enough, you've heard me talk about this project for 4 or 5 years now. So we've had different iterations how we're going to deliver the project itself. But essentially, we have a game in place right now, and we're moving forward with the execution of that plan. And it's going to take a little bit of a while to get it on the ground. But again, I'll talk about that. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I wasn't going to describe too much the scope, the location of the project. One thing that I will point out, and as I have a couple of slides later on that kind of show you the history, and it actually points out the previous PD&E concept we had in place. What you see in the screen is the same location, but we've added a little bit of land to the south of the existing facility. That's that narrow strip that you see shaded. So it's some additional land that we're proposing to include as part of this project. And so in its totality, we're probably looking at about 13 to 17 acres of land. All right, and I'll describe a little bit of the challenges when it comes to the original PD&E concept we had in place, and what we're trying to accomplish in terms of additional land added to the project to add more, more truck parking spaces. But mainly, that additional land that you see shaded at the very south of the project itself, that narrow strip, as I mentioned, it's part of the right-of-way acquisition for a lot of the Golden Glades roadway projects that we have upcoming. Initially, and that's the subject of the next slide, but initially we had those roadway improvement projects coming up online. Well, at least the lettings were actually in fiscal year 21. Thank you, Ivan. And this is, some of the graphical representation of a lot of those projects. Initially, as I mentioned, we had these projects coming online in fiscal year 21 for letting. Those have been delayed due to some issues with FGT, Florida Gas Transmission, but the department is actually working diligently right now to get those projects back on track. And they do have some impacts on our facility, since some of the ultimate configuration of the truck parking facility proposing, it's really dependent on an off-ramp that's shifted to the south. And I'll point that out in one of the concepts. Next slide, please. I have talked about, in our PD&E concept, some of the things that we're looking for, but mainly the department is looking to maximize the number of truck parking spaces. Our PD&E concept was, as the name implies, a concept. We came up with, some general idea of what the department would envision this facility to look like. And we have some, some placeholders within the PD&E concept that actually may include some of these amenities, but, suffice it to say that the amenities are actually going to be dependent on the developer or the operator of the facility, or the P3 partner that we're looking to engage with. So, and again, as I had mentioned in the past in previous presentations, we're still trying to move forward with a P3 opportunity, and I'll talk a little bit more about the some of the obstacles that we may encounter when it comes to P3s or public-private partnerships, and they actually have to do with the fact that the project is federalized. We have some federal funding in place, and I have a slide later on in the financing strategy it's going to give you some details on the kind of money we're talking about and the types of funds. But in general, the minute you have a project federalized, as you may be aware, obviously the feds are going to have some strings attached. They may require a potential private sector partner to disclose certain financial elements for their business as part of the process that the private sector may not be so willing to disclose. So those are some of the items that I'm thinking about ahead of time to be able to mitigate, and that actually poses a risk to the project, because if the private sector is unwilling to disclose certain financial elements that they may consider as part of their trade secrets or business practices, then they may not be so willing to come forward and partner with the department. So those are things that I wanted to kind of point out. And then I'll talk a little bit about the schedule. Normally in these presentations, I go through the process of kind of giving you, general scope, general idea, and I actually talk about schedule at the end of the presentation. In this case, I will talk about schedule up front since we have been talking about this for quite some time. So next slide, please.
If we have some quick questions.
Yeah.
Do we ask them now? Do you want us to wait till the end, or how do you want to?
Kevin, I think we were agreeing in the past that we wanted to wait for questions at the end, but I can certainly field questions at any point in time from the committee.
I would say to wait till the end, simply because we're not in the same room, so it's not as easy to see who was talking or ask questions. So leave everything to the end, please.
Okay.
Excellent. So what I would ask for the committee members and the audience is write down the slide number that's going to generate your question. That way we can go back and kind of try to answer your questions. So in terms of schedule, yeah, that's what you have up on the screen here. And, basically we're looking at maybe getting on the ground sometime in fiscal year 23 or calendar year 23. That's where we have some of our construction dollars are sitting in fiscal year 23, or, and that's actually a July 22 to June 2023. So, and that's what the CY up there stands for, is calendar year. So again, it will still be a P3 process, method of delivery. We have completed our planning work. We have our NEPA, documents have been completed. We're not acquiring right away, as you may be aware. We actually own the land. And in terms of NEPA, one of the things that I still need to do that is not really shown here is do a reevaluation. And what that entails is really freshening up the documents we have. We want to make sure the traffic is still in place. We want to do the traffic analysis one more time. Our PD&E concept will change, therefore I need to go through that process again, but that's something that's going to happen in parallel. And in fact, it will start sometime in the next month or so, and that'll take me about 6 to 8 months. But it fits within this schedule. I'm going to start developing a request for proposal in the next year or so. And our design build procurement process normally takes us, approximately 6 to 9 months. And I actually have a couple of red squares in there that signify a potential infrastructure for rebuilding America discretionary grant for $5 million that we applied for. But I'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide. I'm going to skip a little bit of the information in terms of needs, since we have a documented, pretty solid documented need in South Florida. And one of the things that I have been describing, and I've been talking to some of the committee members in the past, is the fact that we have been using some data that may be somewhat outdated in terms of supply and demand. And that's what the first bullet point that you see up there. That's information that comes out of the Miami-Dade TPO effort that dates back to 2010, 2012. I can easily make the argument that things have gotten worse. But one of the things that I'm going to be doing the next couple months or so as well is to revisit those numbers with an effort that's going to quantify once again the supply and demand in Miami-Dade County. The state of Florida, DOT completed a statewide effort recently, and that's something I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. And so they did some supply and demand analysis, but it did not really place Miami-Dade County, in my opinion, where it should be in terms of supply and demand. It's actually, we kind of questioned the methodology, and we have our reservations. But nevertheless, there were some elements that were missing, especially the local driver element from that supply and demand analysis that the state did. So it kind of gave the impression that South Florida doesn't have the need that other parts of Florida have, and that's somewhat inaccurate. Nevertheless, I think it's no secret that we have the need. And I'll move on to kind of giving you a little bit of the history of the project again and kind of show you the concepts and talk a little bit about the facility that's across the street from our project that's going to be completed sometime in the middle of next year. And that's that transit facility in the Golden Gate. So next slide, please. So the next slide actually has the PD&E concept, and that's what you see in front. On the left-hand side, this is, and again, these are 2016, 2017 PD&E concept. Bottom left-hand corner is the transit facility, and to the right you have our facility, our truck travel center. And then you have an individual concept on the right-hand side. So I'll point a couple of things out in terms of the PD&E concept for our facility. Initially, our PD&E concept was actually allocating an area that was going to be utilized for our incident response area for the department, and that's an area that the department uses to manage, incidents. Thank you, Ivan, for pointing that out. That the department actually uses to manage any emergency incident on I-95, broken down vehicles, buses, and whatnot. So it's an ongoing operation. Well, that area is going to be, or has been moved to the transit facility in the new design build, in the new final design. So what that does is it frees up a lot more space in our facility, in the truck parking facility. So these are some of the examples that, in terms of modifying and moving forward with a different concept are going to play a role. Next slide, please. Next slide actually has, some what were previous and what were existing conditions. The previous conditions are the very far left. This is back in 2017 when this whole thing started, the construction across the street on the west lot. And then you see on the right-hand side that transit facility that's under construction. You got a parking garage, and at the very bottom in the middle, you have the a rendering of the facility itself and what's going to look like on the transit side. And as I had pointed out in the past, this is one of the reasons why we were not able to get our truck parking facility on track early on, because we needed to finish construction of that transit facility across the street, that multimodal hub. So that's really more of a heads up, just a reminder. The west lot construction is ongoing, and as I mentioned, the plan in place right now it's pretty solid in terms of completing that facility in June of 2021. Next slide, please. And this is all relevant, as I had mentioned before, since we needed to finish construction of that site across the street so we can begin our project. So that's what you see up on the screen. That's what that transit facility is supposed to look like, and it will look like. You have a multi-story parking garage. Once that's completed, then we're following that lead and moving forward with our project. So next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the legal consideration, and then that's where I'll start getting into, some of the technical requirements. Obviously, we list all the permits and the requirements that a design build team would have to have and would have to comply with. There's a Army Corps of Engineers, your soft water management permit. These are items that certainly will be taken up later on as we develop a request for proposal, and we bring a consultant that's going to write that, help us develop that request for proposal that's going to go out to the public and to potential private sitters. Next slide. And this is where I'll start, talking a little bit about, obviously the technical requirements. As I mentioned earlier, the department's main interest is maximizing the number of truck parking spaces. That's at the top of our list. We want the maximum allowable number of truck parking spaces. We're going to require our design build teams to integrate our truck parking availability system, and that's the system that's been deployed throughout the state, and mainly in rest areas and way stations off the interstate highway system, I-75, I-4, Unfortunately, as we have discussed in the past, we don't have any rest areas in Miami-Dade County, so this did not apply. Nevertheless, we envision deploying this T-Pass or truck parking availability system with our Golden Glades facility. The electrification component, that's also going to be a requirement, and certainly other items that I will point out with some renderings that I'm going to show you towards the end, and those include security, access control, but suffice it to say that a request for proposal needs to be flexible enough that we allow maximum potential for innovation on the part of the private sector. And generally speaking, we want to allow the private sector to, maximize a revenue stream so they can partner with the state and this type of project. And then now I'm going to move on to talking about really one of the main items that I wanted to discuss and point out, our financing strategy. So next slide, please. So this is our previous cost estimate with the project was around $20 million. Right now we find ourselves close to $25 million. And we have, I'm gonna, if you hit the enter button a couple of times, I'm gonna highlight a couple of items in there. What you see in the green box at the very bottom, that's monies that we have in our work program right now. $13 million in construction, and that's for our fiscal year 23. So that means that we need to let this contract for construction in fiscal year 23. We got $2.1 million. Those are what are called preliminary engineering dollars that we're going to use to develop our request for proposal. And then we have, other sources of income that I'll talk about in the next slide. But I mentioned that we had applied for a discretionary grant application in the past and for $5 million, and that's what you see highlighted in the screen. We are also counting on the private sector to contribute close to $6 million. And I will point something out. The cost estimate you see here at $24 million in capital cost, it's really based on our concept. If you're somewhat familiar with our design build process and how we deliver translation projects, sometimes, and for the most part, these PD&E concepts that we base our cost estimates are not really what gets built. As I mentioned, our request for proposal is going to be flexible enough to allow for innovation, and we're going to obviously have some site criteria, minimum site criteria that includes, as I mentioned, the number of truck parking spaces, maximizing those, the security elements, and certain amenities. But we're going to allow the private sector to innovate and really reach a balance or an equilibrium where they can reduce the capital cost and maximize the revenue stream. And that's kind of the formula that we're not privy to, because this is not what we do for a living in terms of developing truck parking facilities. So what I'm trying to get across here is that I believe that we have plenty of money to deliver this facility without a private sector contribution or a capital contribution. $13 million and the $5 million that we can, in case that infra grant application, that discretionary grant application is unsuccessful, we'll find out sometime in the next few months whether we have been awarded that $5 million grant. If we're not awarded that grant, we have a plan in place to backstop or cover the $5 million gap. And that's what I wanted to point out. The point I wanted to get across, which is I firmly believe that we have a fully funded project, even though our cost estimates seems to be a little bit high. But as I mentioned, they are based on our PD&E concept that it may very well change, and it will more than likely change. So now I'm going to move on to some of our part of the financing strategy. And that is a little bit of history on our our parcel 3705, which is the 3437 acre site that we sold to Miami-Dade County sometime last year. This is that Dolphin truck parking facility that we found unfeasible, and we ended up selling the parcel to the county. And you have some of the details as you see here. We closed the sale last year, and essentially it's an installment sale with the county. We got $2.5 million as down payment when we closed the deal last year in June. And then we're expecting $11.3 million sometime in June of this year, and then another $11.3 million in calendar year 21. And then by 2022, we are going to have every single dollar associated with the sale of this parcel of the county. So as it is, sometime in the next couple months or so, we'll have, 13.3, maybe a little more, almost $14 million in our checkbook, in our bank account, solely for truck parking. And this is sort of our startup or seed money for truck parking. In the previous slide, I mentioned, we're counting on a $5 million or listed a $5 million discretionary grant. If that grant is unsuccessful, we're ready to cover the funding gap with some of the proceeds from the sale of this parcel. And the intent of this money, the funding that you see in front of you from the sale of the parcel in question here, is to really apply to truck parking, our truck parking program. We are actually going to use this money solely for truck parking. If you're familiar, and I've spoken about this in the past, if you're familiar how we conduct business as a state, anytime we have surplus property, we sell property that does not have a transportation value or transportation use for us. That surplus is sold, and the funds actually go in a box in Tallahassee. Well, in this case, we made a deal with Tallahassee and our central office to redirect those funds to the local district, to District 6, solely for the purpose of applying to truck parking facilities or what I call our general truck parking program. So my point here with this is we do have a plan in place to backstop or cover the funding gap in case those $5 million do not materialize, and we may be able to add a little bit more money in case we have some cost overruns on this project. So I think we're in pretty good shape and moving forward, and we'll still have some money left over to perhaps looking at acquiring maybe another parcel throughout the county to develop another truck parking facility. So these are the things that are happening behind the scenes. I've spoken about this in the past, but I wanted to, I kind of wanted to come back and kind of remind you, where we stand and so forth. The next slide actually has our proposed structure, our design, build, finance, operate, maintain structure. I'm not going to get into a lot of the details, but suffice it to say, as I mentioned earlier, is that there are some risks with a P3 opportunity, as I mentioned, especially the federal element. And I described the fact that the private sector may have some reservations when you're funding a project like this with federal funds and disclosures and disclosures they have to do in terms of finances and so forth. So we'll take a look at that. We also have a plan in place in case we don't have a private partner. My core leadership in District 6, it's all on board with the department or our folks from our right-of-way property management department and their consultants actually operating a facility. So in the next coming months, I'm going to give you a lot more details in terms of how we envision delivering the project if a P3 opportunity does not materialize. Okay, so next slide, it's simply some of the risks, and I kind of talked about the risks mainly in terms of publishing an RFP and finding out later on after the fact that you don't have any suitors or any potential bidders, and that's something that we need to address early on in the process. As I mentioned, we do have a plan in place. The federal local match and federal funding component I described, but at the same time, there's It's what we have talked about in this committee for quite some time. There's always the potential for public controversy. We're going to have to do that reevaluation I mentioned once again, and that includes a public engagement component. And I don't foresee any issues since we've been in the area. We have a construction project in place on the transit facility across the street. In terms of public and controversy, I'm not aware of any issues. I was not aware in 2016, 2017 up until recently any public issues, but it's always there. The risk is always there. And if you're been in transportation business for a while, you know that that's something that we always need to deal with. Next slide. These are some of the renderings that I wanted to point out in terms of having odd-shaped parcels when you're laying out a concept or a potential facility like this. And this is actually a rendering from the Site X. That's a parcel that also we have looked at in the past. That's actually the southeast quadrant of State Road 826 and State Road 836, Palmetto Expressway. But I kind of wanted to bring that back into the fold and kind of point out, look, there's a way of laying out these concepts and these facilities regardless of the shape of the parcel, because that's something, that's one of the concerns that I've heard in the past from not only committee members, but also from private sector suitors, which is, look, if you have odd-shaped parcels, yes, there's potential for reduction in the number of truck parking spaces, but there's a way to lay out these concepts. I mean, I think this is a good example. Next slide has some additional renderings, but I also wanted to use these renderings to just to point out, some of the requirements that the department is going to be looking at. Security. Next slide as well. There's another facility, another rendering that shows a potential fueling station. And that fueling station is not a requirement, all right. I think we're going to let the private sector decide whether that's an option that that may be available for that particular private sector partner or partners. We don't want to prescribe certain things that are that may deter from our main objective, which is maximum number of truck parking spaces, some showers, of course, some security, control access, as you see here, access control to a facility like this. And again, this kind of tells a picture of what we're looking for. These are what I would call, and I mentioned as site criteria. This will certainly be a requirement in that request for a proposal. Next slide. Some facilities, maintenance facilities, it's really all going to be dependent on the private sector. So again, I want to reinforce that the point I made earlier in terms of cost and with the cost is based on our concept, and the concept is it's just that, a concept. What we're providing is a canvas for the private sector to develop a facility that meets their needs and meets our needs with maximizing the number of truck parking spaces. You have access control, and you have certain amenities that are required for, let's say, a little bit of freight, and especially for the long haulers. And that's pretty much what I have in terms of the presentation. I'm going to be coming back the next few months or so with updated information in terms of some of the technical elements of our concept as I go through the evaluation, but also to request from the committee members and their contacts to begin the process to promote the project itself. That's one of the main issues that I wanted to point out as well, aside from the financing strategy, is I'm going to be relying on the committee and their help for the context, especially John on the real estate and commercial development side, and those that normally attend. We like to get this out into the public. This is the time to start promoting it now, to bring some attention, to generate some interest, and it's going to be beneficial for the state to understand those private sector needs to be able to write an effective request for a proposal that meets the needs, right? Certainly, we don't want to put something out there that's going to really that the private sector may have some issues with, and those are the things that we want to sort out before we publish an RFP. But there'll be more to it. I wanted to come back, as I mentioned, just to kind of give you an update, talk a little bit about our truck parking seed money or our capital startup money as a result of the sale of that parcel I mentioned, and also to stress the fact that we do have although it may not seem as it is, we have a funded project with the way we laid it out. Right? So now I'm going to move on and take some questions. And I suppose, Kevin, that we'll start with the committee and then we'll move forward with the audience in case they have questions.
Yes, we will. But before we do that, Carlos, we're going to have a little slide change of in the meeting. Barbara is here. So Barbara, can you hear me?
Yep. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. All right. So John has been the acting chair prior to you arriving. So now that you're here, John, you're going to pass the gavel over to Barbara. So Barbara,
I will. And just before I do, I'll apologize for not properly introducing Carlos. I forgot we're being recorded. So that was Carlos Castro, District 6 Freight Coordinator for the Florida Department of Transportation. And I will now relinquish the chairmanship over to Barbara Pimentel.
So Barbara, you have the gavel.
I thank you guys. I apologize for getting late. I had a little situation in my warehouse, so I had to jump on a little later. I was watching all of you guys. You just couldn't see me. So nice seeing everybody. I'm glad to see everybody staying safe and sanitized and getting used to our new norm. So did we just start with the presentations? Do we have to go back to the approval of the agenda and items like that no, or we already gone through all of that? Good job, John.
All that's already been done.
All right.
So all that's left now is to do the Q&A for the first presentation.
Okay, definitely. I do have a question, Carlos, but I'll be honest with you, my mind's a little, and I probably missed a couple of screens there, but I was trying to get my notes. How many acres does that property have again for the Golden Glades? What's the amount?
It's approximately 13 acres, but we have some additional land in there, a pretty narrow strip that we're proposing to add to the project for maybe some of the areas for amenities. It's approximately an additional 3 acres. So in total, we're probably looking about, between 15 to 17 acres in total. But it's an odd-shaped parcel, and that's something that I pointed out earlier with some of the renderings. There's a pretty narrow strip in that area, and on that point, we may have to have a facing approach to the project. One of the narrow parcel of land that we're adding may not be available right away because there's an existing ramp off the turnpike in State Road 7 that will still be there, abutting our project, when we start. So those things will be sorted out in the next few months and next year or so. But to answer your question, Madam Chair, is between 15 to 17 acres.
Okay, great. All right, so what I'm going to do is, in order to make so nobody talks over each other and not to take control of anything, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add each committee member.
Just lost you.
Oh. You froze.
Just lost Barbara.
All right, so Barbara, if you can hear me, go to where it says your webcam. It says stop sharing your webcam and then start again. That's been successful when your camera freezes up.
Kevin, through the chair, I have a technical issue. I got a message from GoToMeeting saying that the number of open web cameras, the limit have been reached, and it threw me out. Yep. It threw me out. So Ivan?
No, for some reason it has a limited. This platform has a limited number of cameras that can be used. But I'm presuming that you called in then, George, so we can still hear you, right? And you can hear us?
Oh, you know, the only thing that it changed was that it turned off my web camera. Everything stayed the same. So I do have sound, and I do have, you know, and I can see what is being presented. But I found that it's strange that, and I don't know if technically there will be a way to differentiate between board members and others. Because you know, I just found it strange that it will take a board member out. So
Right.
I'm just,
Well, it's supposed to,
a technical issue.
It's supposed to have the board members and the presenters up online. So, all right. So looks like Barbara's picture, his face is moving, so she's no longer frozen. So go ahead, Barbara. You're saying something? I think you're on mute. Barbara, you're still on mute, or
There. No.
okay. Ivan, if you can, because I think what she was going to do was to go around with each of the members and then ask them what their thoughts were. So I can't see what she says on here.
Trying to fix it. She says trying to fix it.
Okay. So if you don't mind, Barbara, I'm going to go ahead and ask the members for you. Is that okay? All right. So John, go ahead and ask your questions to Carlos if you have any.
Okay. Well, I'm going to wait, if you don't mind, for Willie. I think Willie had a question on slide 5 originally.
All right. Yeah.
Sure.
All right, go ahead, Willie. You're up.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of an all-encompassing kind of question. You mentioned that you're going to go ahead and I guess make this presentation and then later go and ask for the private sector to kind of backfill the possibility of joining in. Have you thought of doing it the other way around? For example, you know, Pilot Flying J, I can just assume that, you know, they already have, about 750 locations in the country. If somebody was to offer them the only parking area in all of Dade County, I would think that they would possibly at least consider jumping on that opportunity. And then that would, in my opinion, take care of the financing pretty much all by itself. The planning, they would go ahead, I'm sure they have engineers with 750 locations. They must have a cookie cutter kind of scenario where they just set everything up and just say, you know, we'll lease the land and give you this percentage and let us have at it. And, you know, just have you thought of going that direction instead?
Yeah, well, certainly we have, and really we have been working on this for quite some time, as I mentioned. And yes, those national chains are actually on our radar, and we have multiple contacts. I've reached out to them. I have multiple contacts, not only from Pilot Flying J's, for Truck Travel Centers of America, and we're here. But you know, it's been a while since we really had some clear direction in terms of the project, and we had some clear direction, I should say. It's just that it had been delayed due to the fact that we had ongoing construction across the street. And we're using the site that we're talking about here as like a construction staging. So yeah, so we have those contacts, and this is the point where we're going to be reaching out to them, right? You know, in the next few months or so, and at some point in the process, we're also going to have a public forum, an industry forum. We're going to bring everybody together, and we've done this in the past. You know, back in 2015, we held an industry forum. As we were looking at developing this facility, among them, you know, and another one, bringing it together with a transit facility. So we went through that process. We got a lot of feedback. We got a lot of intel, and so suffice to say that we have done it before. We're quite familiar with the process. It's just that from our perspective, the way we deliver projects, we have to go through the process of coming up with a concept or a proposal where we lay out approximately 30% of what the plants would require to justify and really get to the point where we can essentially say that we have a project that we can build and is feasible. But yeah, you know, obviously, and I kind of mentioned that, you know, this is the canvas. You know, we're putting a concept. together, and I'll give you a figure. You know, our concept actually relies on the potential of 10 truck parking spaces per acre, and that's extremely conservative. The private sector does a lot better. You know what I mean? So it's simply a concept just to make sure that we comply with National Environmental Policy Act. We'll go through a design build process, and that design build process that we have in place as a state agency, you know, allows for the ability of having what are called ATCs, or alternative technical concepts, and that's where the private sector or potential suitors come in and say, look, you know, your concept is fine, but this is what we propose because your concept says that you can get 135 truck parking spaces. In our concept, or because we're subject matter experts, says if we can essentially come up with a set of plans that lay out a business case for, let's say, 200 truck parking spaces. You know what I mean? So that's accounted for, and that's the reason why I wanted to point out early in the presentation. Look, this is a concept. This is not what's going to get built more than likely as a truck parking facility. What we're going to request from the private sector is the following, and something that I failed to mention is that, you know, the way we're delivering the facility is we're going to enter into a long-term leasing agreement with that potential operator and developer. All right, you know, essentially, here's the land. Give us a general ground lease for 30 years, to give you an example, and it's your facility for 30 years. Yeah, we're going to have some site requirements, as I mentioned, truck parking spaces, security, some amenities, access control, and so forth. The things that we know are important for the local market, trucking market, and national market for the long haulers. So.
Sounds good. And that little thing also on the data you had originally, you were saying that there was a deficit of about 12,000 truck spaces. Is that daily annualized, or is it like what number? How'd you come up with that 12,000?
That's annualized, and that's actually that's annualized, and it's actually a reference to an earlier work by the Miami-Dade TPO, and as I mentioned, somewhat outdated. I'm taking up an effort in the next couple months or so to go back and revisit, you know, really the supply and the demand, to quantify the supply and demand in Miami-Dade County. It's you know, somewhat to me troublesome to be speaking about the need of truck parking, and I'm quoting data from 2010, 2012. You know, anybody can easily make an argument, a counter argument, to really discredit, you know, our need down here based on that data. So I'm taking that effort up as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know. We did a trial run yesterday and everything was working good. Apparently, I don't know what's going on here. Thank you, John. I appreciate you taking over for my technical difficulties at this end. So going on to the next committee member, John, yourself, I know that Willie had a question. Okay. John, your questions next, please.
Yes. I'll go ahead. You answered part of my question, Carlos, was the density. When we look at what other truck parking facilities are doing, they really jam them in. Will you put restrictions on what the density on that can be?
Look, you know, we want to maximize the number of parking spaces, but we want to be flexible enough, as I mentioned before, for the private sector to lay out a concept for a facility that meets their needs, right? There has to be some equity, and that's the equilibrium and the balance that I mentioned with the number of parking spaces and those additional revenue stream generating amenities, where there's a truck wash, some chrome shop, or a convenience store, even the fueling, you know, that I don't know. You know, and you know, our request for proposal is going to have a scoring system that's going to award points to those firms that actually come up with a facility that has the higher number of truck parking spaces. But that's not, you know, the entire story. You know, there's going to be other technical requirements to assign a score to those potential design build firms to quantify and really arrive at the best team, the best selection for procurement purposes. So I don't know if I'm gonna have restrictions, but I'm not, to be honest with you, I don't have an answer for that just yet. We want to maximize the number of parking spaces, but there's also something to be said about those amenities that will generate a future revenue stream for the private sector.
Okay, I think probably that would all be answered. You said an industry forum is a direction you're thinking about going. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it will be answered, with a combination of industry forums, some of the work that we're doing right now that's happening behind the scenes. I have some procurement research activities going behind the scenes, as just to tell you, a P3 project for the state of Florida requires legislative approval. So we got to take it all the way to Tallahassee, So we'll kind of work on that. But, the track is for, the request for proposal consultant will also help us hold an industry forum. And we're going to be able to answer a lot of those questions. And that's going to be fed right into that request for proposal and the technical requirements that will go out to the public for bidding.
I was just going to suggest we've seen a lot of success with seaports around Florida that are engaging in large infrastructure projects, actually having pre-RFP meetings. It's almost like an RFI, a request for information, getting people from the industry together to find out which direction they need to go. It avoids a lot of missteps in terms of getting a lack of response to that by knowing in advance that the industry perhaps can't work with a 30-year lease, they have to have a 50. For knowing that they can't work with particular restrictions, but others are not onerous. Just as a thought, to have some type of a forum before you set up the RFP.
Correct, and that is the intent of the industry forum. Maybe I didn't specify that.
Okay, good.
We'll have maybe a couple of industry forums in the very beginning to field the questions and to answer some questions and really get some guidance to develop an effective RFP. So yes, that's exactly how we're going to proceed. We'll get the input from private sector before we publish an RFP, correct?
Oh, good. You get quite a brain trust that way. I had one other question. Does the study that was quoted on the Florida Freight Advisory Committee's presentations and discussion the other day, does that impact us in a significantly negative way, or are we beyond that at this point in terms of funding?
I think we're beyond it. Just for the committee, I'm going to follow up, Kevin, with an email pointing to that very same study that John is referring to, and it's the statewide truck parking effort that I mentioned also. But essentially, the methodology that they use omitted certain aspects, as I mentioned, the local driver element. Therefore, it showed South Florida and specifically District 4 for Lauderdale and in Miami-Dade County area, Broward and Miami-Dade County, as really being at the bottom of the list in terms of priority and need. But to answer your question, for the sake of this project, our funding is in place. It doesn't have an impact. It may very well have an impact in the future because as anything that we do as a state agency, we assign a priority, right? And that's also making a business case that South Florida is not the priority. It's District 5, Orlando, I-4 corridor. So.
Then my last question was, is the delta in this, the gap that you're looking at covering with a private party, is that about $5 million to $6 million? Is that what you felt the investment would be?
Yeah. So I think so, but again, that's
pretty
based
small.
on but I think that private equity contribution, as I mentioned, I want to be mindful and I want to repeat that one more time. It's based on our concept. So let me put it in simplest terms. I believe that a private partner can build a facility for about $18 million. And that's the kind of money we have in place right now without a single contribution in capital. Yes, the contribution is going to be, O&M, right? Operations and maintenance, and maybe a little bit more here and there. But I think there's enough money on the table right now, and to the tune of $18 million, 13 and another 5 that we would backstop ourselves in case we're not successful with that discretionary grant application. That's enough, $18 million. I think that's enough to build a facility. Because if you look at the type of facility that we're looking for, it's simple, right? It's not, you don't have some elaborate 5-story parking garages. It's asphalt, maybe a simple building facility here and there. It's not very difficult. It doesn't, you're not building anything elaborate like you're building across the street in the transit facility. It's got a parking garage,
no, that's
5-story parking garage, you have bus space and whatnot. So this is simple, and that's also something that I wanted to point out with the renderings. Look at the renderings. Gates, access control, small building, 10,000 square feet building, perhaps. We don't know that for sure. So, and asphalt. So maybe I'm oversimplifying it. It's that elaborate.
Can I cut someone off? I mean, we're getting really bad feedback. I'm hearing a lot of people talking at the same time. Is there any way that we can, keep our conversations, either mute your phone so that we don't hear your conversations, because we're having trouble listening to the presenter right now. So whoever has their phone off mute, we appreciate if you can mute it. Thank you. I'm sorry, Carlos, because I'm hearing various conversations at one time.
Not a problem.
I could hear it. Thank you.
Stanley, do you have any questions for Carlos?
Yeah, Carlos, thank you for that presentation. My question was similar to what Willie and I think John touched on it as well too. Just why are we still using data that's 10 years old? But I think you partially answered that. The other thing I was wondering, in the beginning of the presentation, you focused a lot on the importance of a PPP, a private-public partnership with the private sector. But then, as you explain the concept and the fact that you pretty much demonstrated how you have, well, part of the concept is to be based on how you explained it, should be that your ability to lay out 30% of the funding, correct? And I think if we're talking about the same piece of parcel, which is the one that was sold to Miami-Dade County at almost 27 million? I forget what it was. What percentage of the cost does that represent? And at that point, how do you then, how important is it to bring in a private sector partner to fulfill this project?
Look, we have a couple methods of delivering the facility with P3, with a public-private partnership. And all that says is simply, look, I'm going to have someone that's going to design the facility, it's going to build it, it's going to operate it, it's going to maintain it. If there's a capital contribution that's required, they'll put a little bit more money up front, right? And then in return, what do we expect? We expect, some leasing agreement. We'll get a monthly rent. We'll be a landlord in that, essentially. So that's one way to do it. You got a single source that brings everybody together and takes care of everything. Now, if that doesn't turn up, if that private sector partner does not materialize, we have a different approach, which is we'll put out an RFP. An engineering firm is going to design and build a facility. Then we're going to get ourselves a operator separately, right? And that's another contractual vehicle. Get an operator, open truck parking, have an asset manager, and that asset manager is going to take care of leasing perhaps a 10,000 square building, right? And then we'll get some revenue stream. So it's almost the same thing. Ideally, the P3 is the way to go since it's a one-stop shop. In terms of the finances, I don't know if I was clear enough. There's money in a work program to the tune of $18 million right now, and I believe that that's enough, as I pointed out, enough to build that facility. The other funding, the revenue that we're the proceeds of the parcel we sold to the county, that's an installment sale. And the idea is to use that, those proceeds with any funding gaps for this project or any future projects for truck parking throughout the county.
Thank you, that's helpful.
All right, George, I know you're there, even though I don't see a camera. George, I wanted to ask you as a committee member, do you have any questions for Carlos regarding the presentation?
Not really. Once again, excellent presentation, Carlos. I had the same concerns that were shared previously by the other board members, but nothing to add. So excellent presentation.
Great. And I think Bill, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I wanted to make sure that if you had any questions that you wanted to ask Carlos regarding the presentation. No.
No, excellent presentation. It takes a lot to digest, but the good thing is we're moving forward, and the effort to get trucks is appreciated, and we all know how important it is, and we hope it can go forward successfully. That's it.
Well, we all agree with you there. All right, perfect. All right, since we have no more questions on the Golden Glades truck, hold on, I'm pulling up the agenda. So moving on to the next item on the agenda is the FTAC Port Miami Tunnel Freight Mobility Evaluation Study. Carlos, back at you for an update.
Yeah, so I'm still on, and again, thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, I'm having the opportunity not only to present the committee, but also to monopolize your agenda as I've done in the past. So that kind of shows that I'm sort of back on track myself here. So this is an effort that we've undertaken for quite some time, and in a minute or so, I'm going to turn it over to our consultant project manager, Young Kian Wu, but I'm just going to make a brief introduction just to kind of refresh your memory. This is going way back to 2017 when we started this project. Obviously, things have sort of changed, during these times, and as you may be aware, of course, operations at ports, airports and seaports are totally different. In the past, and most recently, Port Miami was really focused on the passenger side of the business, right? On the cruise industry. That was evident with a lot of the projects that were coming online, the terminals and whatnot. And even their master plan had been delayed a couple times. Plans for that inland terminal were sort of shelved after Kevin Linsky moved on to water and sewer. And this is an effort that was actually accounting for, it is accounting for the access points to the port. And that is Port Miami Tunnel, as the name of the study implies, the access point through rail on the on-dock rail operations. And we've also heard about, passenger operations through that rail line instead of cargo operations, right? So we heard all these things. And last but not least, and one of the most important ones on the part of the department, and that is Port Boulevard, the other access point to the port. So this is what this effort has entailed, is a long-range planning effort that was looking at those three access points, understanding port operations, and really start looking at a planning horizon to anticipate future improvements in the area. The tunnel itself, obviously has a shelf life of 35, 40 years. We may not be able to do very much for the tunnel itself, but we can start planning ahead for access through Port Boulevard. Next slide. I think the next slide is our mission statement. I'm going to avoid the mission statement. I know I've bored this committee for quite some time with a mission statement, so I'm going to avoid that. But next slide, I think it has our couple items on the agenda on the overview of the project itself and the objectives. So this is just a refresher. My memory serves me correctly. I think the last time we were out here presenting this effort was 2017. I'm going to have Yongkian Wu, our consultant project manager with CTS, to kind of lay out, briefly describe and refresh from memory on the objectives, and not get too technical on the effort, since we have a modeling simulation effort associated with the project itself. But suffice it to say, the overarching goal is we have been looking at implementing a performance program for access to the port itself. And this is what the effort entails. Of course, there's a lot more to it. One of the things that we're looking as a desired outcome is potential improvements to Port Boulevard. That's one of our main goals. What are those improvements going to look like based on the demand, whether it's cargo or, in a way, cruise port or passenger operations? Our jurisdiction of the port is really the Port of Miami Tunnel, as I mentioned, but also Port Boulevard, a segment and an access to the port. So I'm going to turn it over to Yongkian Wu, as I mentioned, to move forward with the presentation.
Thank you, Carlos. You guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. How are we doing in terms of time? I know we're a little bit behind schedule, so how much time do we have to cover the remaining 20 slides? Okay, let me just make it a.
You're okay. No issues.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity to give an update on the project. Carlos has provided a very good overview. Basically, what we're trying to accomplish through this project is these six objectives. So we wanted to develop a implementable and innovative program to really monitor the performance for the tunnel, for the port, boulevard, and the rail connection. So in order to do that, we need to collect a large amount of multimodal data to really understand what is actually going on the port, so that we can develop a transportation demand modeling tool to actually simulate the travel demand, traffic operations on the port. And also we need to develop a simulation model. To develop a simulation model to assess the traffic operations, really looking at the different growth options in the future, and look at the different options, alternatives in terms of network improvement, and see how the traffic circulation will be impacted. And also, this is a strategically important area. There's emergency situations happening, so we wanted to actually develop a contingency plan in terms of a hurricane evacuation, or when you have other emergency situations. So this is our overall objective for the project. So the core component, can you move on to the next slide, please? The core component of this project is obviously a travel demand model tool. So this one shows the general modeling framework in the conceptual level. So basically what we wanted to do is to look at the port and see how much traffic will be generated in terms of passenger vehicles, also trucks. And then I would determine where these trips are going to go. And when they do go, and what kind of a mode they're going to use, and eventually how much traffic will be actually generated on each particular roadway, or in terms of a rail connection, how much traffic will be on the roadway as well, on the railway as well. So obviously, it's going to take a lot of data as input, and this model will generate a lot of output so that we can assess the performance, and we can use the model output to look at the environmental impacts and economic impacts. So this is the overall framework where you have a model as the core component. You have a lot of data, and then you use the data to actually look at the environmental and economic impact. Next slide, please. So instead of boring you with all the formulas and equations, I'm going to actually focus on some of the travel characteristics and also some of the travel behaviors that are actually important for the modeling, but also of interest to you. So I'm going to show some analysis results that we have actually obtained based on our data collection efforts in the past. So the study area for our model is the port, and also extends to a northern part of downtown Miami, and also include the interchange between I-95, MacArthur, and also A36. We also extended our project to the southern tip of Miami Beach, because based on our conversation with the Met concessionaire, so they told us when the traffic is actually congested, when the trucks cannot go into the port through the tunnel, so they have to go all the way to Miami Beach and stay there until the traffic clears up. They can come back and get into the tunnel from there. So we wanted to make sure we cover that portion also. Next slide, please. Yeah, we have actually collected a large amount of data. So that includes the turning movement counts at 37 intersections. We also went out to collect the vehicle classification counts and the link counts in many locations. This is a different from your typical PD&E study where you look at the traffic at a typical weekday, because of the special situation on the port. So you have a lot of traffic on the weekend. So we wanted to make sure we cover both the weekdays and the weekend. That's why we did a 7-day count. We also actually used big data, so-called the GPS or location-based data, to actually get origin destination information for our study area to see how many trips are coming from certain places and how many trips are going to certain places. We also collect the traffic signal timing data, parking usage data. I guess this is probably the first time we actually did a comprehensive analysis of the parking usage at the port. We were also actually following the customer satisfaction survey that the Port of Miami has been doing. So we wanted to actually get some travel behavior information. I'm going to show you more details later on. And we also used the historical traffic information collected by DOT to look at how the traffic has grown in the past few years. So the next few slides will focus on these data items and see how the traffic situation has changed and how we understand the people's travel behavior around the port. Yeah, this slide actually shows the historical AADT volumes from 2015 after the port is open to traffic. So the blue bars are the traffic for the tunnel, and the red bars are the traffic for the port port bridge, port boulevard. That, as you can see, the traffic actually, this is actually the total traffic that includes both passenger vehicles and the trucks. So the traffic has been actually growing, and more so on the tunnel than the bridge. So the traffic on the bridge actually fluctuates a little bit, but it's basically it stays the same. And this slide shows the daily volumes just for truck traffic. So as you can see, again, blues are the tunnel traffic, the red are bridge traffic. So the volume on the bridge has been continuing to grow in the past 5 years, and the traffic on the bridge actually fluctuates, but they stay low. I think approximately between 85% of truck traffic uses the tunnel at this point. So that you can see that in the beginning that percentage might be lower, but now we've reached a kind of a stabilization. The traffic is kind of steady. So approximately 85% of the truck traffic uses the tunnel. Can we move on to the next slide? Yeah, this one is a little bit difficult to see, but basically this is a origin destination plot that we got from the big data, from the GPS data. What the GPS data does is to track each individual vehicle by either it's a truck or a passenger vehicle, and show where they actually go, how long actually they took, and where they stay. So we use that data to analyze the origin and destination. So this one actually shows the truck traffic that go to the entrance of the tunnel. And not surprisingly, the majority of the traffic comes from I-95 and also from MacArthur Causeway. The next slide, please. This one is the same information that just shows how much traffic is actually going to the Port Boulevard. And this one is slightly different from the other one. There's more traffic coming from a 36, and you can say it's probably because a lot of cruise passengers coming from there. So you have more people coming from the west side near the airport. Next slide. Yeah, this one we actually looked at the parking data on the port from 2017 to 2018. We looked at the parking for actually each garage and by different types. We aggregated everything together, and we came up with the monthly variation. So you can see the months for March and the month of December have the highest usage on the parking lots. And the month of September has the lowest usage. I can't quite explain why September will be the lowest, but it could be a data issue. But the overall pattern matches the cruise schedules. We actually also analyzed. We look at the cruise departures around those times. So this more or less match the cruise passenger schedule. We also next slide, please. Yeah, we also looked at the daily variation by the week, and not surprisingly, on Monday, Saturdays, where you have a lot of cruise passengers coming in and leaving, you have highest parking usage. During weekdays, there's not really much cruise passengers, and so majority of the parking lots are used by employees on the port, so they're much lower. Next slide, please. Yeah, another interesting aspect is how actually people come to the port. So the Port of Miami has been doing this passenger customer survey for a long time. Initially, they didn't have any information regarding how people travel, so we actually coordinated with them. We asked them to add a few more questions in their survey so that we can understand how people actually come to the how cruise passengers come to the port. So as you can see at this point, it has been a little bit difficult, and the sample size is relatively small, but it tells us a story. It's been consistent. Right now, we have about 500 people that have provided the information. So this is a relatively smaller sample if you consider the number of passengers, cruise passengers, to the port. But still, it gives us some information. This is the information that we cannot get from anywhere else. So basically, the majority of people they come by bus and shuttle bus, 27%, and a similar amount of people actually use Uber and the Lyft. So these two combined is more than half of the people that actually use. They don't really use private vehicles to come to the port, and only 7% of people they come to the port and they park their vehicle on the port while they're actually taking a cruise. And also there are 16% of people they came in, with other people. Maybe their relatives or friends just drop them off, and some other people use pre-arranged ground transportation services, about 8%, and about 10% of people actually come by taxi. There's about 1.5% people actually they actually park their vehicles off the port, and the usage, the public transportation usage is fairly small. It's only 0.6%. Next slide, please. Yeah, this one we just ask the passengers how they actually came to the port, And so this is similar to what we found from the earlier slides in terms of passenger vehicle usage. So about 63% of people come in by the tunnel, and the remaining 36% use the port bridge. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is another interesting question. So now the port is thinking about bringing the passenger rail to the port. And actually, I think the station design for Brightline station is ongoing. I don't know what the status right now. Last time when we actually went to the port, so they told us they were actually working on the design. So I guess it's just a matter of time that the passenger rail will be actually brought to the port. So we ask people how likely you're going to use the rail service, and the overwhelming majority of the people said they would actually use the service, which is a good thing. So 86% of people said yes. Okay, so next slide, please. Yeah, so those are the travel characteristics and the people's travel behaviors that we wanted to actually replicate in our model. We also wanted to actually develop a set of performance measures or metrics just to see how the port as a whole would perform. So we're looking at, I think, a set of 9 broad categories, anywhere from cruise demand, cargo demand, and transportation supply. We also look at the mobility, availability of the tunnel, so, in terms of the closures. And next slide, please. Yeah, and also reliability, obviously the safety and environmental impact in terms of air emissions and the fuel consumption, as well as economic impact in terms of employment, personal income, tax and revenue. So these kind of measures that we're trying to develop for each scenario so that we can compare and contrast how the tunnel will perform based on different growth scenarios, based on different improvement options. Next slide, please. So as you can see by now, so we have actually collected and will actually generate a large amount of data, and our model was developed using a proprietary software. So what we wanted to do is to make all this information easy for the general public to use. So we actually have developed, we're actually working on this data module. We are providing a visualization tool that's based on, that's a web-based. We're using Amazon Cloud to put all this information. So when you guys come into this website, you can actually use the tools that are provided on this website to actually compare different scenarios, look at the different information, look at the traffic volumes, look at the parking, look at the terminals, and also look at the performance measures. So we're building a lot of functions to make it easier for you to compare different scenarios. You can actually synchronize the maps for different scenarios, create bookmarks, and you can also generate reports from the tool so that you can use it for your presentation or report. So we're working on this. It has a lot of functions built in there. I mean, the whole purpose is to make it easy to use, and also so that you don't have to deal with all the boring modeling stuff, and that's working behind the scenes. So by the end of the project, you should be able to have access to this website. Next slide, please. Yeah, I mean these are the activities that are still going on. So we're still continuing to work on the model calibration and validation. So Carlos has mentioned a lot of changes that have happened during the course of the project. And for us, because what we're trying to do by developing a model is to trying to replicate what's going on underground currently. what's going on. And we're assuming that people will have the similar travel behavior in the future so that we can make the travel forecast. However, at this point, especially with the COVID situation, the travel patterns might be completely different. So whatever we have done so far might be irrelevant or incorrect. So that's one of our biggest concern. So we're going to be continuing to monitor how the traffic on the port will evolve when we actually get back to semi-normal in the latter part of the year. We may have to go back to look at our model, look at the traffic again, and see how our model performs. Comparing the newest situation. So obviously, this will have impact on our other tasks in the future as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in terms of overall project schedule, the current schedule is to have this project completed by December next year. So we actually have completed the assessment of the existing conditions about a year or 2 years ago, last year. Now we're actually working on this mapping. We're working on this model data module that will include the mapping capabilities. So by September 2021, we'll finish the evaluation program development. And we also have some supplemental services. And this will, Carlos also mentioned the inland cargo terminal and other things. We don't know how these, improvements, the progress of these improvements will affect our progress. We're trying to complete everything by the end of next year. There's a possibility we might have to extend the project, but that's something that we'll have to work on with DOT and other stakeholders. So yeah, that's just a quick overview of where we are on the project. So I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Are we gonna take turns?
Sorry, I had to. No, I was unmuting myself because I didn't want any noises to interfere with my phone. So, thank you so much, Mr. Wu. I really appreciate it. But I have a couple of questions just out of comments. On slide number 11, you had mentioned something about that you weren't sure why the numbers were so low on September. Could that be because it's the peak of hurricane season, and that it could be that could be the reason why those numbers are shown, because that is the hot time for hurricanes, and maybe people avoid the cruise line.
School starts.
But
very good point. Yeah.
So my other question was, I was curious because when you were going through the parking wheel that shows the breakdown of how many, that's slide 13, how many people actually park on the port. Is there a reason that they give? Is there a reason why? Are we asking as a component as to why they don't park on the port? Why we have so few? And because those parking garages take up a lot of space. Yes. So it's, so if they're being underutilized, is there a reason why has the comment come out as to why? Is it security? Is it the cost? Is it, have they actually said anything? Because there's several parking garages on there, and if they're underutilized, there is, that's maybe something that the port and or the county, everybody can kind of reevaluate. Why is it the connectivity? Is it getting to them? It's getting out of them? Are they confusing? Or they don't want to use because they're cumbersome? I mean, I'd be curious to hear why they're not utilizing those parking garages to their full capacity. Because the percentage numbers are the percentage are really low considering the amount of passengers that go on those cruises. So
could it be that only 7.4% of the passengers are local? Everyone else is coming from out of town and therefore do not have their own vehicles here.
That could be a good point. But I would figure if you're local, you probably have somebody drop you off so you don't have
on top of that,
I'm just curious because there's a lot of parking garages and they're taking up prime real estate on the port, and that could be better used for something else if they're not going to utilize it or reduce them to be able to use as workable space for the port. considering that we're so short on container storages, so short on fumigation areas, you know, and if they're underutilized, let's put them to better use. You know, that I'm just curious as to see why they weren't using, if they were local, if they're out of staters, if, you know, does it break it down to that level so that that could be a red flag that we can, I'm not saying that it's a negative thing, it could be a positive thing for the port to reanalyze and maybe get rid of some of those and better utilize that space.
Yeah, I mean, the survey, we didn't really ask people why they would use a certain mode of transportation. Most of these surveys are done by online, so we don't have an interview with them. But I guess one of the major reasons is that the cost of parking. So if you actually go on a cruise for a prolonged period of time, the cost could be very high. So if you can use other means of transportation to come to the port, I guess they would save a lot of money just by using other modes.
And well, that's exactly my point. If it's too expensive, either the port needs to reconsider pricing or better utilize that space for something that can generate different type of revenues for them. All right, thank you so much. Those are my questions. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to the committee members and ask and see if any of them want to go one by one. That way, so we don't have any overlapping of conversation. So I'll start off from my left here. So I got Willie on the end of my screen. So I'll start off with Willie and ask me if you have any questions.
Just a quick one on the gathering of the data. Are you going to wait to see if there's some kind of a flattening of the volume before you start gathering data again because of this COVID thing? Are you going to kind of see if it peaks again and then goes back to normal before commencing the gathering, or are you just going to start at a set date?
Yeah, we are actually thinking about the end of the year if the cruise industry can come back when they actually reach their peak level. So we're thinking about December, January timeframe to go out and collect the data again and see how things have changed by then.
That's all I have.
Great. Stanley, do you have any questions?
Yes, thanks, Barbie. Can you go back to the slide where you have the performance measures?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was looking at. No, I think it was another. It was another one. Was there 2 pages of performance measures or just this one?
Yeah, there are 2 slides, right?
Ah, there we go. Can you speak a little bit about what have you learned on the safety portion of it? I know on the economic impact, at least on the cruise side, one of the things that we learned was that the cruise industry represents close to about $8.9 billion in economic impact. Mm-hmm. So this is going to be a post COVID-19 and however length of time it's going to take for that cruise industry to ramp up. It's going to be critical to everything that goes on going forward. But on the safety side, I'm just interested, what have you learned regarding crashes or anything that we could glean from the study?
We actually did a crash analysis in our existing conditions report. We actually used 5-year data. I think that was from 2014 to 2019, maybe 2018. I don't remember the exact details on top of my head, but it's general. I think it's my general impression was that safety has improved after opening up the tunnel in our study area. We haven't actually seen any fatal crashes in that study area. I don't remember the details, but overall, I think in terms of safety, the impact has been positive.
Okay, and if I could just follow up, and as far as the rail goes, I know the rail goes all the way to the port. Anything there from a safety perspective that we should be paying attention to? Probably not.
We don't really have safety information from the rail services.
Yeah. Okay. Because the reason I'm asking too is, you know, as you went through the presentation, I was thinking about the that there was a very positive polling where people actually wanted services from, for example, Virgin to the that I wonder if this is part of what we're looking at down the road. You know, a possible Virgin Rail connection to the port, or something in that regard. Because I think Bobby's right in terms of the usage of these parking lots that are really only used for you know, employees of the cruise or people that have to come to work, but not necessarily for passengers. So there could be some more efficiencies in how we use these spaces. But I think that might tie into the very positive polling of people who want to be able to get directly from, you know, obviously this would be a passenger rail, but passenger rail directly from, say, Virgin to the port. Am I off on that, or is that wishful thinking on my end?
I know there's a lot of planning going on. So as I mentioned last time I went there, so they're already working on the station. So it looks like this is going to happen, but I don't know the time frame. So if it does happen in the future, then this will be actually included in our study. But we will also need data, so that would have some, you know, we'll have some little difficulty actually, because we need to understand what's going on so that we can model them. So
Yeah.
just having the service by itself is not sufficient for us to actually model them. But if that does happen, if we can have some information, yeah, we can certainly look at that impact.
Madam Chair, can I just ask one other question?
Sure.
So, you know, one of the things that I'm sort of honing in on a lot, I think across the globe, just before the COVID-19, there was a lot of talk about when things get back to normal, there's going to be a lot of congestion with trucks at ports. And I know that a lot of the ports were seeing that congestion building up just before the COVID-19. I don't think Port Miami had that issue with a lot of congestion, but you know, how does this plan that you guys have been working on would help potentially alleviate the congestion that could come about? And I say this because, you know, when we talk to the folks at the airport and obviously at the port, on the cargo side, obviously with passenger, volume is down, you know, some 70–80%. But on the cargo side, they're really only looking at 4% decline in volume. And you know, when things ramp up, we hope to see this thing build up very quickly. But what, you know, Port Miami has not really talked a lot about congestion with trucks. Would part of this plan help in alleviating that congestion or potential congestion?
Yeah, depending on the future growth scenarios, especially you know, what's included in the master plan and what Port is planning on doing in addition to that. I think in our future scenario, future year is 2045. So if that happens in that time frame, so we'll look at the different growth scenarios, and the traffic congestion on the port is definitely one important you know, aspects in our analysis.
Yeah, thank you.
And let me elaborate. This is Carlos. Let me elaborate on that question, Stanley, if I may. Keep in mind the following. I mentioned in the very beginning, in terms of planning horizons, we're looking at a long-term planning. Keep in mind that, you know, we may not be able to react immediately if we find out within a couple of years through in the process that we may need some improvements in the area. We need to start planning now. We need to start looking at those future scenarios right now to effect to have some potential mitigating elements and strategies in the next 5-10 years. That's something that I wanted to point out and keep on. In terms of COVID-19, and congestion at the ports, we have heard some issues, and this is something that we kind of walk a fine line between our jurisdiction and our responsibilities as a state agency in the transportation business and our local partners, whether it's a seaport or an airport. Right? I mean, I mentioned jurisdiction. Yeah, we have Port Miami Tunnel ourselves going in, and that's under a concessionaire agreement, but also at Port Boulevard, and then we have rail operations. And then you have, obviously, port operations that we have absolutely no control over. We have actually fielded several complaints from the trucking community, and this is no secret. I mean, I think Madam Chair and the committee is quite aware of those long lines waiting for containerized cargo, right? I mean, that's an issue on the operational side, the terminal operators, yet a lot of those complaints are routed to the state transportation agency, right? And that's where we need to kind of walk a fine line. So it's sort of a balance and a fine line that we need to walk with our local partners in the ports and our transportation partners to work together and find common ground and solutions that are going to not only improve access to these seaports, but also decrease congestion in our roadway system. So I kind of wanted to point that out and summarize that long-term planning horizon and long-term efforts that we need to start now. And the work we're doing here right now will pay off in the next 5-10 years.
Can I add to that, Carlos? I'm just going to add, because the complaints, if it's from industry and just want to make a comment there, industry knows that, how do I put this nicely? They're going to complain about anything and anything they can in order to move their cargo around quicker. The problem is that they understand that the port is a tenant port. The port really does not have any jurisdiction over how each terminal does their operation. With that being said, technically the port, there is no congestion on the port for the port purposes. The congestions are inside the terminal operators. I just want to make that very clear, because it's been something, an ongoing battle of, it's the Port Miami, there's congestion, there's delays, there's always a problem at Port Miami. It's not the port, it's the terminal operators. And since the port is a tenant port, it's very difficult for a landlord to walk into a tenant and say, well, you have to run your operations like this. Okay, now unless they're going to flip the bill of how to run their operations, the port really can't tell a port operator how to handle their part of their yard. They're paying their rent, they do their operations the way they are. So, when it yanks my cord when they say they're complaining about the port, because the port, that's not a port function. We're not a port authority here, that the port itself handles the operations, handles the stevedorians, handles the terminal operators. We're not. We are a landlord port, and that's something that we need to make sure that every agency reports and tells that to the industry, because it really isn't the port's responsibility to make sure that there's no congestion. It's to make sure that these terminal operators run on an efficient basis. And I think that's where, and I'll speak with my hat. I know Juan Carrilla very well personally, and he's one of the very few port directors that will sit down at the table with everybody and make that conversation. So when they're talking about congestion on the port, we have to look at that at a little bit different angle when you're talking about the cargo, when it relates to the terminal operators, because we want to make sure that we're not bashing another sector, because you have vehicles and cars, which they are congestions, there are problems when there are events and the parking, for some reason, I don't know how they get into the port to park to handle some of the events, to go to the airline arenas. Those are things that conflict. But when it comes to the truck, I'm not sure how we can fix those lines unless the terminal operators change their format. And there's a lot of components to that. So I feel for the truckers because, but I don't know. I just want to add that comment because that's something that just it always irks me when they say the port. The port isn't the delay. It's the operators, the terminal operating companies, and we need to recognize that. And that's something that I don't see mentioned on this. I don't see the terminal operators on this list of performance measures. I think they should really, really be held to a better standard and making sure that their operations run a little bit more smoothly. Either they do the investments that are necessary, which some of them do not because it's a financial investment. But I think that the performance measure should include the terminal operators because they are tenants on the port and it reflects their lack of operational or not lack, I want to say, or misscheduling or their delays has a bad reflection on all the other performances in there. So if you have a line of trucks, of course, no cars can get in there. If you have a line of trucks in the tunnel, you can't get any cars in there. So we need to add to that performance measure, and we really need to measure those terminal operators because they are a lot of the cause of the delays of these trucks. And I think it's something that we should consider, or you guys consider, measuring them.
Yeah, Barbie, that's a great point. And I think on the reliability under C6C, maybe an asterisk just to make that point that this is, it's a tenant operated port. Some kind of asterisk. Yeah.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Yes.
Good, noted. Those are good comments. We'll take those into consideration.
Okay, with that, I'm gonna, because you give me a chance, you ask for a dime, I'll give you a quarter. John, you have any questions?
Barbie,
Okay, who's ever got their phone, you have to mute your phones when you're in conversation because we're hearing a lot of conversations in the background. Please, 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 let's respect those that are trying to speak and just mute your phones. We appreciate that.
Barbie, that was a great point. That's something I forget too. Wu, thank you for this presentation. I've known you a long time and you never cease to amaze me with your ability to put this stuff together, just like nobody else. There was 2 slides, 9 and 10. The slides I have to look over to the left on a bigger screen. 9 to 10 here are the weekday trips using the tunnel and using Port Boulevard. Those are kind of interesting. Are those both directions? Did you aggregate the sum, or is that geared towards departures or arrivals?
This is a one directional from other places to the tunnel. And also not absolute numbers. These are relative numbers because they can't really capture the entire population, but they can give us a relative numbers. So when we actually combine them with traffic counts, then we can come up with the absolute numbers. This is just a distribution, relative numbers.
Those are really interesting. In terms of the parking, I don't want to beat that to death, but Barbie made the point I was going to make, which I really feel strongly about. Parking structures are becoming antiquated structures. There's nothing more immovable than a piece of real estate, and especially a building. They're built usually to serve a need at a moment in time that reflects a need that's built up until it couldn't be ignored anymore. For years and years, we all drove our cars everywhere. Then we got Uber and Lyft. And then we start getting people from other countries coming here where they're used to good rail transportation and they're used to Uber and Lyft. And to me, that sort of explains just by itself why there's less use of the garages. The other thing is, though, if the garages aren't being used, it's like you hinted at, Barbie, there's better uses for that land on a 516-acre piece of island that comes out of the bay. Certainly, in the current environment, we can build multi-story buildings. We could put warehouse on the bottom. We could more warehouse a level above, and the trucks really could go all the way at the top. They can make their way around those first two levels. There's a lot of things, but I think taking a stronger look at the parking situation is going to be really good for the port in the long run. I think by the time we build a garage, by the time we build almost anything, we're going to find that habits have changed a lot. I don't believe people will be traveling the way they are now in 15 years. And it takes 5 to 7 years to really get anything built. So with that in mind, I kind of wondered, when you looked at the parking statistics, Will, do you have any way of looking at whether they're declining? Or you mentioned they really haven't measured that in the past. Is that right?
Right. This is the first time, probably the only time we've got information from the port, and we only have one data point at this point, the 2017, 2018. So yeah, it's hard to tell. But I'm hoping that we can get more information from the port. The last time was a significant effort for them to pull the information and summarize them, and so we're grateful to their efforts. But I don't know whether we can get another set of data from them to look at the changes over time.
Well, besides looking at the performance metric, which I think is incredibly important that Barbara mentioned, of the terminal operating companies, I think the measure of the garages would be important, because the port is so land constrained, and those garages sit in areas that would be valuable for cargo operations. I think there's a lot we could accomplish if we could demonstrate that they are declining in use and serviceability, and really that the future use will be shrinking as well.
Yeah, noted. Yeah, that's a good point.
Thank you. I think that's all. Yeah, that's all I have. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you, John. Jorge, do you have any questions? You have to unmute you.
Okay. Yes, I'll try to be quick because I realize that we're over time. But Mr. Woods, once again, this is a great presentation. I have basically 2 areas that I would like to briefly mention. Number one, as we move to this opportunity at the end of the year to revisit the study, I think that we have to keep in mind that a lot of it will depend on where we are on the health developments at that time, whether a vaccine have been developed, because some of that initial data, if things are the way they are, might be kind of misleading. For instance, even though that we have making great strides in the use of public transportation up until this point, most likely people are going to go back to the cars because they might want to avoid being, with a lot of other people. So if by that time a vaccine is not in place, you'll still be seeing low rate of recovery for the cruise industry, as well as some misleading numbers into the resurgency of the car. In addition to that, I think the only comment that I have is more on the strategic plan for the port. Because the port needs to, we all agree that the port is one of the top economic engines for our county, but there are competing factors. We have cargo and we have passengers, and the issue of either one of them on how the future development, this small parcel of land needs to be mapped out. We need to go back to whether an inland port is needed, and the sooner the better, because if that is not addressed, then there's going to be a lot of missing opportunities, because landowners are going to go ahead and continue to develop land, and there are not too many open spaces or vacant land in Miami-Dade County that is going to be there available to do an inland port should it be needed as a strategic need of the port. So I realize that we're over time, but those are the two things. And I think that when we go back in December, again, it's an opportunity to address these issues. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point.
Barbara, are you talking? Because we're not hearing you.
Yeah, I can hear.
We lost you. All right, so let me talk to you, Barbara, until you get your voice back. Has all the members got their questions and answers in? Is anybody else left? Go ahead, John.
I just wanted to back up what George said, that the inland port idea.
Oh. Now you're going in and out. Right, so John, your voice is going in and out. George, can you talk for a second? Let me see if it's everybody's voices are messing up. George, can you say something?
Yes, I can. I just
I can hear you.
I can hear you well.
Oh, so I'm getting a pop-up on my screen saying slow network connection. So it's probably something on my end, I guess. But Barbara, are you still not able? Are we still able to hear you?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Sorry, I got kicked off. I apologize.
There we go.
Mute the computer.
Hold on. I am muted.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Barbara. So,
Okay, can you hear me now?
yes, we can.
All right. Jeez. Hey, I can't wait till we get in person again. This technology stuff is crazy. All right, I apologize, and I know we're really running short on time, and I wanted to give an opportunity to Bill if he had any questions, to ask Mr. Wu if he had any questions on the presentation on the port.
Yeah, Barbara, this is Bill. I'll make a comment. What you say about the terminal operators is correct, but you have to extend that. You got to look at the longshoremen, who are some are union, non-union, and then we look at government officials. Some of the problems at the port are driven by, particularly in the cargo area, is the lack of government officials at a time when they're needed. So I just throw that in for an add-on.
Good point. Good point. All right. If there's no other questions, and I think that would be the end of the presentation, Mr. Wu, I really thank you for the information. You can keep us updated, especially what we can have. That'd be great. I really do. I think this is good. So thank you so much, and I'm gonna turn this over now to new and old business going on with the agenda really quick so we can wrap up. Kevin, all yours.
Yeah, we're going to wrap up real soon. FTAC attendance so far for all meetings, we've had a perfect attendance. Everybody's been here, and just so you know, one Flores got on here about 3 o'clock or so. He's been online, but because we have a limited number of, so he's been on the phone because we have a limited number of video cameras available, maximum of 6. So everybody's okay on their attendance. And for the next meeting is going to be for June 10th and as of now, most likely it's going to be the same virtual format, whether it be GoToMeeting or another one. We'll figure that out at that time. But we'll be looking at each other through screens, I think.
Can't we just go to the beach and sit 6 feet apart? You know?
Yeah.
I second the motion.
Separate votes.
All right, great. Any member comments? Next item, the only thing I'd like to add is the appointments. Kevin, I know that there's a few applications or a few resumes that have been submitted to county commissioners. Is there any way that we can kind of push? I know that there's priorities and stuff like that, but now that we're kind of getting back into our new norm, and the county's going to be opening up next week, I think that we need to start looking at the appointments, and I know that there's been several resumes submitted. So, I mean, I'd like to see if we can get those pushed through so we can add those people before they lose interest on the committee, or get assigned to another committee. You know, we wanna have them here. There's a few good candidates there that I know of, and I want to be able to really get them on board, because we have a lot of issues that COVID is going to redefine how industry and how we all work.
Like I mentioned to you on the phone last week, and like I said, this is for the record for the meeting. Like I said, I can only do as much as we can is to give the names to the commissioners and board members to do their appointments. But a lot of times at the meetings, when it comes to the appointment section, they'll say any appointments for any of the advisory committees, and there's nothing at all. And even though we'll send reminders over and over again, because we've had at least three or four people who names have been there, including Michael Silver, who used to be was one of the members appointed by a board member who left. So he's been like in limbo for over a year. Waiting to come back. He's still here. He's here at every meeting, but as a guest, as opposed to being a member. So hopefully next week when the board meets, we'll at least get one appointment. I'm not going to be greedy and say two. Let's just hope that somebody decides to appoint somebody.
Yeah, we just need to push them along, and I know they got their plate full, but we kind of, we all eating from the same plate right now. We're all dealing with the same problems, same issues. So we all can relate, but as all businesses, we need to start moving forward and seeing how we can think. And I just don't want those people to lose interest. And I see that Stanley and John are ready for the beach, Willie. So you gave a suggestion. So and I'm going to throw in a little suggestion. We'll have a little cooler with Coronas on the beach.
What are they wearing? Are those
they're Port Miami visors.
Oh, okay. I thought I could not read. I thought that they were MAGA hats.
No.
Okay. Well, do we have any other comments from the members before we go ahead and wrap up and adjourn the meeting? No? We're all good? Okay.
All good.
With that being said, then I wish you all continue safe and stay sanitized, please. Keep your distance, practice your social distancing. It's very hard for us Latins, man, because the first thing you want to do is give somebody that hug and that kiss, and it's become a cultural shock for us. So just stay safe and sanitized, and with that, the meeting's adjourned, and look forward to speaking and seeing all of you guys next month.
All right, thank you very much. Meeting time is 4:17 p.m. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.